Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm gaining mass. Good Spanish food. So it was important for me to understand, the dynamics of the structure of the vacuum that would produce charge, the dynamics that would produce, angular momentum, spin. But all these were dynamics that you could find, everywhere, meaning like from the solution that I was coming up with, was there evidence of it? Now, this would be a black hole. It could be a universe, it could be an atom, a subatomic particle, but I was, defining the structure as a double torus, as we saw, with these dynamics, and the two membrane of the two toruses interact with each other so that you get like wave functions at the equator of the system. And I started to think, there's this problem in physics where Einstein worked on it and Hubble worked on it, like the rings of Saturn or the rings of Jupiter, why is dust and matter accumulating at the equator of these planets? Why are planets spinning around the sun at the equator of the sun? Why do you look, when you see a galaxy, you see that most of the density is at the equator of the galaxy, and you get a disk-like structure? It started to make sense now that this would happen because this would be where matter gets stuck in between there. And now you have like a ring and then space and then another ring and then space, or a planet and another planet and another planet. And this is actually the function of space-time creating that horizontal plane that's a gyroscopic effect of the two torus interacting. So I started to look at cosmological structures, and some, for instance, here is quasars. These are huge vortices that are coming out, these objects. This vortex here, this big spinning vortex, is 10 to the 6 light years. That is, a million light year long vortex. And when they look at it very closely, it seems like it's spinning at the speed of light as it approaches the black hole. So again, we're finding the same dynamics. Now this is a microquasar. Those are found inside galaxy. And again, you get these vortices, but now it's 3 light years long. So, the same dynamics in each fractal function. But when I was looking at all this, I was thinking, well, this is one thing, but actually, let me see. Actually, if you have such dynamics, how, you know, in the middle of the double torus is the hole, right? Is the space. Now the space has this function, the vacuum has this function that seems to be stillness, right? This function at the center that is like no movement. So how does like all this movement create no movement? Like in the middle of a hurricane, what do you find? You find a hole, right? And in the hole, there's no wind. It's perfectly calm. And then around it is spinning. It can be spinning on hundreds of miles an hour, like at least, you know, in some cases, 100 miles an hour wind, but in the middle is stillness. And, you know, that kind of links with a lot of the ancient culture knowledge. You find that in many different cultures, like stillness at the center of the spin, is at the center of everything. And so I was wondering, okay, well, I have the dynamic part. Where is the stillness part of the equation? What is the geometry of stillness? The geometry of the spin and the dynamics of the double torus is more like the extension part, the expansion part of the structure. What is the geometry of the collapsing part, the fundamental geometry of the vacuum? And I start to wonder about this. And I realize, well, in some ways, the sphere, right, or the double torus is the expansion part, then is the most unstable part. So the geometry of the collapse, the geometry of the source of the stillness must be the most stable geometry, the most compact geometry. I was looking for the geometry of perfect equilibrium. So, let's see. That slide before, you know, at the time, I was studying ancient civilization at the same time as I was studying physics. And I was, you know, looking for information about the geometry. It seemed like all these different civilizations all around the world built similar structures around the world, these pyramidal structures. And I started to wonder, maybe they knew something about the geometry of the vacuum, about the geometry of the structure of space. And I opened this book that was called Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids by Peter Tompkins. And I opened it so-called randomly, and it opened on this page. Now you remember that I was working with like a sphere and tetrahedrons. Now the tetrahedron is the smallest, most stable geometry of the Platonic solids. So I knew that the tetrahedron may be like a possibility for understanding the structure of the vacuum itself, the structure of stillness. But I knew the geometry had to be perfect equilibrium so that all the vectors would cancel out in the middle of the torus to create perfect equilibrium, perfect stillness. The part we call the vacuum, that doesn't seem to be anything, but that is actually everything canceling out. Just like the middle of the hurricane. So I looked into it, and when I opened this book, I was surprised to find a tetrahedron in a sphere. And I was thinking, you know, that's very strange, because this is what I had concluded to. So I started to read where this came from in this book. And it was the result of an engineer that spent 20 years studying the ancient city of Titehunacan near Mexico City. And he studied, you know, there's the moon pyramid and the sun pyramid and the way of the dead and all this stuff. And he was doing a survey for the American Society. And so he was surveying, and the same numbers kept coming out. He was trying to figure out these numbers. And he noticed that the buildings were in position to each other so that it would make the solar system map, including Pluto and Neptune, which were not discovered by us until the early 1900s. And then when he continued to look at the math, he realized that they seemed to always come back to the mathematics that describe a tetrahedron in a sphere. And the tetrahedron, if you put one point on the South Pole, for instance, will intersect the sphere on the northern hemisphere at 19.47 latitude. And it has a very specific, very interesting relationship to the sphere. If you put a tetrahedron inside the sphere, it divides it so that the sphere has 2/3 on the bottom and 1/3 on top. If you flip it around, it's the other way around, right? So if there's two tetrahedrons, you would have you have 19.47 north and 19.47 south. So this was very interesting. What I found out later on is that I wonder where that city of Teotihuacan was relative to the whole earth. And it turns out, when I looked, that it was actually, let's see, I can animate this. There it is. So, you see, this is that latitude of the tetrahedron. Let me play it again. So, by the way, here's Hawaii. This is actually why I live in Hawaii. And you can see that that latitude goes over, let's see if I can rotate it a little more. There's Africa. You can see that it goes over where Mexico City is. And so this is Teotihuacan right there. So not only is all the mathematics inside that city, inside that ancient city, telling us about the tetrahedron inside a sphere, but the city itself, on the surface of the earth, is where a tetrahedron intersects the sphere. Now, I thought that was really, amazing, because you don't expect that from, ancient civilization that's supposed to be not very evolved. Never mind, when you look at the buildings in there and all the mathematics and all the alignments, I mean, you realize these people were certainly not savages, right? And so, I started to elaborate on this geometry because I knew that it couldn't be just one tetrahedron, because one tetrahedron is not equilibrium. In fact, the tetrahedron out of the Platonic solid is very strange. It has two centers. It has a gravitational center and it has a geometric center, which are not in the same place. And so the tetrahedron by itself could not be the geometry of the vacuum only. It had to be more than just a tetrahedron. So I started to work on this. And you know, when I did this, actually, I was living in my van and I didn't have a computer. So I was trying to compute this in my head. So it took a lot of time, and I got a lot of headaches out of it. But let's see. See if I can start this. I have new animations. Hello. Oh, there it is. Wrong screen. Okay. So here's this one tetrahedron. And, you know, I'm really happy with these new animations. These were done by a company called GAIAM. GAIAM is a large corporation in the United States that distributes DVDs. They distribute more DVDs than Disney at this point. And they are making a DVD about my work that will come out, because the DVDs I sell right now are 8 hours long. So it takes a commitment, right? So they came to me and they said, why don't we make a 2-hour DVD so we can put it in the Walmarts and, you know, in the Targets and, you know, and all this. So that's on its way. And I got access to their animation bay. And so we did these animation. I'm really excited. These are not published yet. So the animator was having fun here spinning things. And so here, what I found is that this constant that was found in Titicaca, this constant of, you know, the tetrahedron relationship to the sphere, matched the mathematical constant that Buckminster-Fuller, everybody knows who Buckminster-Fuller is? Yes? And so Buckminster-Fuller, which I believe was a very great genius, came up with this understanding that tetrahedron was fundamental as well, but he said it's a stack of tetrahedron he called the isotropic vector metric. And he thought it was the mathematical blueprint of creation. So here I'm showing you the isotropic vector metric. So it's 10 tetrahedron on the bottom layer. There's 6 tetrahedron on the second layer. And then there's 3 on the third layer and 1 on top. You get a large tetrahedron out of it. And so I was interested with this because I thought, you know, not only Buckminster-Fuller thought it was the fundamental mathematical blueprint of creation, so he somehow kind of figured out that the vacuum geometry might have been tetrahedral in nature. And I think that if he would have spent a little more time with Einstein, he had a meeting with Einstein, but it was only a few hours. I think the two together would have solved unification at the time. But when I looked at it, I said, well, there's the first thing I wanted to do is take off the tetrahedron to see what was in between. And so I removed the tetrahedrons, and now you're seeing the space in between the tetrahedrons. And what's in between the tetrahedrons are octahedrons. You see? And the octahedron just happens to be a pyramid. And that's the thought I had started with. Is like, why did all these people build pyramids all around the world? So I was thinking, now it's like, oh, maybe this is a clue. Maybe they were building pyramids to have a resonating structure interacting with the structure of the vacuum, with the structure of space-time. And, you know, it was really interesting because when I had that first thought, actually, I was in Isla Mujeres in Mexico, the island of the women. I thought it was a nice name, so I went there. I was single at the time. This is when I was still a ski instructor. And, you know, I had this schedule where I was teaching skiing in Canada, and then I was teaching skiing in Australia in the summer in Canada and the winter there, and then I was coming back to Canada to teach the winter there, and so I was permanently frozen. And at one point I was like, I need to unfreeze, right? And so I went to Isla Mujeres for a summer to learn to teach scuba diving. And so I was teaching scuba diving, and one day off, I thought, let's go and see the pyramids at Chichen Itza. And so I went to Chichen Itza, and when I arrived there, I was mind blown. I mean, so beautiful, so amazingly perfect. In the middle of the jungle, in the middle of nowhere, you know? And I was sitting on top of the pyramid, and a tour guide came with a bunch of people, and he was telling them how the quarry is like very far away, and you know, they brought the rocks over, and then they, you know, with copper tool and with like vine ropes and rocks. And I was listening to all of that, and it reminded me when I was a kid and I was learning about the pyramids. And I was learning that, like, you know, that was what they were telling us in the schools about how the pyramids were built. It was like hundreds of thousands of slaves with vine ropes and all this. And to me, that didn't sound quite right. So I was really excited when I realized that inside the isotropic vector metric was pyramids. And so I realized as well that there was something strange. When I looked at all the octahedrons in the middle, let's take a look. It's gonna get there. Let's see. Let's make it go a little faster. There you go. In the middle of the octahedron, there was another set of tetrahedrons. Where'd they go? Here they are. And, you know, these were tetrahedrons that didn't belong to the octahedron. They didn't belong to the other tetrahedrons. And they were reverse, pointing down. And they were rotated from the main tetrahedrons. And so there was asymmetry. And I didn't expect asymmetry because the name of the geometry is isotropic vector metric. So isotropic, you expect, isotropic means the same everywhere. So you expect it would have no asymmetry. So I knew this was not complete. It could not be complete because if it was the structure of the vacuum, it would be perfect symmetry. So I was looking for perfect equilibrium, perfect symmetry. So I knew I had to do something about it. So I reconstructed the isotropic vector metric in my mind. I was doing this in my mind, so it was, you know, a little strenuous. But so one thing I noticed is like, well, the universe is polarized. Male, female, white and black. So there must be two isotropic vector metric. And they must be opposite from each other. They must be rotated from each other so that they are polarized. So now I rotated one relative to the other. And now I had two isotropic vector metric. But you see, now I had another problem. It's hard to see, but you see, now I have an egg shape instead of a sphere, instead of a perfect double torus structure. I have an egg shape. So I was like, that doesn't work because the universe makes spheres. So I was thinking, or double toruses. So I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe I need to push one into the other. And that took me a while to figure out because I didn't want to distort any of the tetrahedrons. I didn't want to have the middle become a big mess. I didn't want to have some weird geometry in the middle that didn't mean anything. But eventually I figured it out in my little head how they would fit into each other. And I went, oh, okay, actually, when you put the two together so that they produce a perfect sphere, the geometries in the middle, the tetrahedrons that were in the middle that didn't seem to fit in, that was the asymmetry, was actually the tetrahedrons to receive their reverse metric. So that when you push the two together to produce a perfect sphere, the geometry in the middle became, okay, they were having fun with spin. Hello. Oh, there we go. The geometry in the middle became the only geometry in perfect equilibrium. This, I'm removing the other tetrahedron so you can see what's in the middle. So that, you see, those spaces that were in the middle that were reversed, that I didn't know what they were for, they were there to accept the reverse metric. And when the two polarities came together to produce the perfect boundary condition, right? Like the male and female coming together, the geometry resulting in the middle is called a cuboctahedron. And it was nicknamed by Buckminster Fuller as the vector equilibrium. The only geometry in full equilibrium in all vector possibility. Because you see, the vectors to the middle are exactly the same length as the vectors on the edge. So you get perfect equilibrium. There's no other geometry like this. 12 vectors coming together to produce singularity, to produce perfect stillness, perfect equilibrium. You can test this yourself by using your bicycle wheel. If you remove spokes from your bicycle wheel, you can remove spokes all the way down to 12. You know, if you're removing two opposite spokes at the same time every time, you can go all the way down to 12. And at 12 spokes, you can still ride your bicycle. But if you go down to 11, if you go down to 10, anything below 12, then the wheel will collapse if you try to ride it. Right? It's the minimum amount of vectors for perfect equilibrium. And that number 12 is everywhere in many ancient texts. It's actually 12 around 1. 1 being the singularity in the middle, which is 13. Which is a vector that's curled onto itself to infinity. So I was really excited. It was like the polarities coming together to create singularity, to create the new life, to create the new point. You know, it's like the male and female coming together creating the child, right? the singularity, the new life, and the point of absolute stillness. Although children are not quite still. But that's after they come out. I just had a new one 5 months ago, so I know. So this was all good and dandy, but there was another problem. When I found this, I was very excited. I thought, oh my God, this could be the geometry of the vacuum. This could be the geometry I need to build this technology to reproduce the right dynamics to produce a singularity in space-time. And so, but I had new problems. I had holes up here. You see, some of the faces of the octahedron were covered, completely covered, but some of the faces were uncovered. So I had a new problem. I had a problem of asymmetry once again. And so I knew I wasn't done. I had 2 isotropic vector metric, which is 40 tetrahedrons. And I had to add tetrahedrons to continue to finish the metric. So I had to cover all these faces. And when I covered all the faces, I had added another 24 tetrahedrons to the 40. So 24 plus 40 is 64 tetrahedrons. And when the 64 tetrahedrons came together, all of a sudden I had realized what I had done. I had built a next level vector equilibrium, a next level octahedron on the outside. So the metric was growing in octaves of octahedrons. So it could grow to infinitely big or to infinitely small to create equilibrium at all levels of interaction. You could build the metrical space a little bit different as well. You could think of it as 8-star tetrahedrons. You see? 8-star tetrahedrons made out of 8 tetrahedrons each that are coming together. And you know, 8-star tetrahedrons, the tetrahedrons are pointing out. It's like the radiative side coming together to produce the collapsing vectors of the vector equilibrium. So the 8 tetrahedrons of the vector equilibriums pointing in. So I had both sides of the equation in the structure of the metric. It all kind of came together in this beautiful way. And I thought, that's it. This has got to be the geometry of the vacuum. The other thing is that it grows in perfect octave, like musical notes. Each next size cube octahedron is half the distance in radius as the original one. So it grows like musical note. It's like the vacuum is like a big musical instrument that seeks, you know, equilibrium at various scales. And so I was very excited about that. I know it might sound strange to you, but it was exciting to me. I thought this has got to be the vacuum structure. Oh, okay. Here we go. It must be growing in perfect octave like this to fill the space of all the structure of the universe. And from it, the double torus emerge because these structures are collapsible. When you collapse them, they produce a double torus. We eventually wrote the math for this. And it was hard for people to visualize that. So we did a little animation so you can see how the double torus come out of it. Now this is a kind of a rough animation because it's not quite like that. I'm working on a better one to describe it. But here you're going to see the linear geometry of the structure of the vacuum come together to produce the double torus. You see, when they come together, each one producing a torus, now you have the double torus. Here's the 24 other tetrahedrons. And here we're going to roughly show how the geometry actually rotates to collapse to produce the dynamics, the spin of the double torus. And here we are representing the matter production that's occurring at the center of the system. You see, in this understanding where the vacuum is the source of creation, matter creation didn't just happen in one big bang, so long ago, but it actually is occurring all the time. Matter is being produced all the time in our universe. This is why we are expanding and accelerating. Our universe is accelerating this constant matter production because the universe is constantly learning. So there's constant new information occurring everywhere all the time. I know you guys might have questions about this, but we don't have time to get to too many details. However, we'll try to have a question and answer session at the end of the day today. Is that good? So this, is occurring everywhere. It's this dynamic of the vacuum collapsing, producing this perfect equilibrium in the middle, which describes the spin around it. The reason why I'm telling you all this as well is that when you meditate, when you turn your senses inward, this is where you want to go. You want to go towards stillness. You want to go towards the singularity at the center. More you experience the stillness, stronger the hurricane is going to be around you. Right? Stronger the energy is going to be generated around you, stronger your field will be, stiller you can become. You are the shaft of stillness. You are that point of singularity at the center of your existence. That is actually what holds your information. In an infinite universe of scales, from infinitely big to infinitely small, you are the center of the universe, because if there's infinite amount of scales, every point in the universe is the center, right? You can't define a center. Every point becomes the center. Now, I'm not saying that just figuratively. I mean it literally. If there's infinitely large sizes of universe, there is a universe out there that you are actually the center of. And it's not this one, because we know approximately where the center of this universe is. So it has to be a larger one. Much, much, much larger. So, when you meditate, when you incorporate your black hole nature, integrate that universe that you're the center of. Integrate that. It might take a little while. But then realize that that universe that you're the center of is the center of even a larger one. And that one of a larger one, and so on. That is why all points have the information of all other points in it. Because it's all embedded. So as you realize that you are the center of the universe, there's one thing you must not forget. That is that everybody else is the center too. Otherwise, you might have some serious difficulties. So, you all learn about crop circle. Crop circles. Now we're going to come into a field of information that might be a little difficult for some people. That is the field of information that says we may not be alone out there. It just happens there might be life elsewhere in this universe. And these other beings elsewhere in this universe might be more advanced than us. You know, these things have been occurring in England for a very long time. And so at one point, a bunch of people that study these things, study crop circles, said, maybe we should, if somebody's trying to talk to us, maybe we should talk back. So they went out there and they stomped around and made big letters. I guess they wrote it in English. They assume they must know English by now. And they wrote, what do we need to know? And the next crop circle that occurred was this one. Now, this is exactly the geometry I've been just showing you. What do we need to know? You can see that the way the hay is bent, the way the hay is woven, you can see that it was made so that you get dark, shadow and less dark, reflective surface, so you can see that it's a three-dimensional tetrahedron structure. You don't do that so easily, stomping around at night in the middle of the night. It just doesn't happen that way. Never mind how big it is. You can see here, this is 1997 that this happened. I had already described the 64 tetrahedron grid of the structure of space-time when the question was asked, what do we need to know? Imagine that you were an advanced civilization out there and you found a planet like ours. Remember how I was saying that we have a limited amount of time to get off the surface? So this advanced civilization would have got off their surface on time. They survived the whole thing. And you found a civilization like us. People always say, why don't they just land on the White House lawn and get it over with? Well, in order for that to happen, we would have to stop shooting. Right? Like, imagine you show up with your ship to this planet, you know, that's not so advanced, and you tune in to their little, you know, satellite feed of CNN, right? And you're listening to the news and you're going, oh my God, what are they doing to each other, right? And then you turn to your crew and you go, okay, who's volunteering to go down there and land on the White House lawn? You'd get the guy who's in the corner, he's like, well, I have an appointment at the dentist on the other side of the galaxy. I'm sorry, I cannot go. So what would you do? Well, if you have advanced technology, doing something like that might not be such a big deal, right? So you'd find nice fields in modern countries that have good media and everything, and you maybe give them, you know, information to try to help them along. Understand the geometry of space, understand the geometry of the fundamental structure of creation, so maybe you can help them get off the surface on time. So then 2 weeks later, they were insisting, or a few weeks later, they were insisting on the pattern. They did another one. And this one, they put another piece of information in the middle. And when you look at that new piece of information in the middle, you get a whole new set of information. And guess what it is? It's the same geometry, but going inwards, going towards the vector equilibrium, going towards the collapsing part of the equation. So in two crop circles, after the question was asked, what do we need to know? We have, you know, the fundamental principle of the expansion and collapsing function of the structure of the vacuum. For somebody like me that was doing that kind of research, you can imagine that I was ecstatic. I mean, I was jumping around when I found this. Jumping around in my van, you know, from the outside must have looked bizarre. What's happening in that van, you know? And so it happens as well that if you put the octahedron structure on top of this, it matches nicely. And then other crop circles occurred. Look at that. That's a perfect 64 tetrahedron grid. You'd think they're trying to tell us something. So, you know, there's much more on the crop circle thing. And actually, there's crop circles. There's one crop circle that's very impressive. It's a reply to the Arecibo message that we sent in 1972, I believe, from the largest telescope on, radio telescope on Earth at the time, Arecibo. And, you know, Carl Sagan and a bunch of other scientists put this message together that it's like a time card, it's like a binary code that says we're made like this, and we're made like, we have like this table of elements and all this. And this crop circle showed up, anyway, near a radio telescope in England, you know, with the reply. But if you get my DVD, it's on my DVD. It really helps us when you buy DVDs because all of our research is done in non-profit mode, and actually I'm not sponsored by any other people than the people themselves, you know, like this is for the people, by the people. And we're, you know, the foundation is doing the best it can to like continue to do research and to continue to get the help of other physicists and so on. And so, you know, everything you can do to help us is very, very important. we're going to start a member section to our website now so that you can participate every month and you get newsletters and you get archives of our phone calls. I do a phone call every month that you can participate in, and you can ask questions and so on. And so you'll have access to archives, so please help us. But, you know, these pyramids that were found all around the world, they seem to have a connection to this knowledge about the geometry, to this knowledge about the structure of space-time. And the pyramids themselves represent something very amazing, very remarkable. That is, they cannot easily be explained with conventional means. Right? It doesn't work out. It really doesn't. When you try to do the vine pulling, you know, slave guys with like logs and everything, there's a whole bunch of problems that happens. It was a good idea in the 1800s when the English archaeologists got there, but when you do the math, it doesn't work. It really doesn't. Right? First of all, if they were rolling all these stones on big logs, when you go there and you check it out, you're in the middle of a desert. No logs. No trees. Right? Where did all these logs come from? Right? And then Grand Pyramid of Giza, right? 2,300,000 stone. All right, 2,300,000 stone. And when they were finished placing them, so it's not just a problem of carrying the stones, when they were finished placing them, the apex of the pyramid is 1/4 of an inch off center from the 13-acre base. 13 acres, okay? The point, 5,000 years later, is like almost perfectly in the middle. After placing 2,300,000 stones. Right? Now, that doesn't happen with farmers. It just doesn't. Actually, if you had all the means in the world, all the engineering in the world, all the money in the world, with our current technology, we can't do that. Because you have to divide 1/4 of an inch by 2,300,000 stone to get the accuracy of placement. Okay? And those guys, they didn't have walkie-talkie. So imagine the dude that's on the first level, right? They're making the first level. Now they gotta have this thing like perfect, right? Because if they off like a teeny bit on the first level, then you forget it, right? So like the guy's on the first level is on one corner, and there's the slave over there on the other corner. He's putting a rock down, and like the guy's like he's eyeing it. Yeah, right. Okay. You're a 1/4 of a micron off. What's wrong with you? You didn't sleep enough. What's wrong with those slaves? It's an amazing feat of engineering. Never mind that when they were done, then the faces of the pyramid is aligned to the north, like very high level of accuracy. It's not like you can build it and then like pick it up, you know, and kind of line it up. You got to calculate all that ahead of time. I mean, it's amazing. And it doesn't happen with a bunch of slaves pulling on vine ropes. And you know what? Finally, there's more and more archaeologists that are saying, well, yeah, there is issues. Thank you. One of the issues is that the Egyptians loved to write at the time. They wrote everywhere, in all of the temples, in all of the tombs. They put hieroglyphs everywhere, telling us about everything, what they ate, how they went this, how they did that, everything, how they made love, everything. I mean, no details were spared, right? For some reason, supposedly these pharaohs built these pyramids to bury themselves in it. Right? Well, in all of Egypt, there's nowhere where it says, oh, by the way, on our spare time, we built the pyramids. What, they forgot to mention it? They built the most amazing building, the largest feat ever done, and they forgot to mention it? You know, there's no at the entrance like, this was Pharaoh so-and-so, and we built this to bury me in it. The other thing is, all the archaeologists assume that pyramids were built to bury pharaohs. However, most of the pyramids, actually all of the pharaohs, were not found in pyramids. The mummies were not found in pyramids. They were found in underground caves in the Valley of the King, which is not where the pyramids are. Many pyramids were sealed completely. It was very difficult to find the entrance. They had to dynamite themselves in or, mine the pyramid to get in. And they would hope that they fall into one of the passages and then backtrack to find the entrance. Because typically the entrance was plugged with 20-ton boulders that were perfectly fitted so you couldn't tell. And so they would do that, get in the pyramid, get to the sarcophagus. Typically the sarcophagus would have a lid of a 20-ton that was sealed. And they would open that lid and they wouldn't find anything in there. What was their conclusion in their report? Tomb robbers. Tomb robbers got there before them. They opened the 20-ton block, got in there, opened the sarcophagus, remove all the stuff in it, right? Because they really love old bones. And then, put everything back in and perfectly reseal everything so nobody's, they had nothing else to do. So, pyramids were used for other purposes. In fact, there's a book I really like. I don't typically recommend esoteric book, but that book, because of the research I've done in laboratory with some of the technology I've built, I believe is quite accurate. It was a book of a remembrance that a young woman had at the time, and it's called Initiation by Elizabeth Heisch. And I think it's a very important book because there's teachings in there. It talks about, she remembered a lifetime where she was being initiated in the pyramids. And she's the only other person at the time that I came across that had recognized that this object called the Ark of the Covenant that's in the Bible was actually inside the pyramid and was the power source of it. So, there's other monuments in Egypt that are very mysterious. The Sphinx. Most people think that the Sphinx is carved, is built. It's not built, it's carved. You'll see blocks on the Sphinx, but those are repaired. The Sphinx was actually carved directly out of the bedstone, you know, in the Giza Plateau. And, you know, if you were commissioned to build the Sphinx, if somebody asked you, go and build me a Sphinx in the Giza Plateau, you would go over there and you would like carve it, right? If you were to carve it, you would have to remove blocks around the Sphinx to free it so that you could carve the body. When you remove those blocks, what size blocks do you think you would remove? You'd probably remove like, you know, 100-pound block, 500-pound blocks, even 1,000-pound block. But you wouldn't remove huge blocks. Well, in this case, the Egyptian, or whoever did this, did not remove small blocks. They removed huge blocks. Okay? They're 200-ton blocks. 200-ton blocks. They're very large. They're removed right out of the enclosure, right out of around the Sphinx. Pulled out. Not only are they 200-ton block, but they're stacked on top of each other to make the Valley Temple in front of the Sphinx. So not only did they remove 200-ton blocks, but they were stacking them. 200-ton is barely what we can lift with the largest land crane on earth today. It's about 200 tons. It's big, very large cranes. And these cranes, they don't roll around the desert with 200 tons. Okay? They pick up these parts, they turn, and they drop them. They don't go around the desert. Okay? Now, if you look at the enclosure of the Sphinx, there's actually water erosion there. And the excellent work of researchers such as Dr. Shaw and Graham Hancock, but John Anthony West showed that this is actually water erosion. And water erosion of this kind could not have happened in Egypt since 10 to 12,000 years ago. So now you don't have 5,000 years ago Egyptian going around with 200-ton blocks. You have people going around with 200-ton blocks 10 to 12,000 years ago. Now that's a problem, because we were supposed to be, you know, barely out of caves at the time. So forget about carving the Sphinx. Why am I telling you all this? Well, because it's important to realize that our origins might be a little different than what we have been told. And why would it be important to understand our origins? Because if our origins are a little bit different than what we've been told, maybe in that set of information, this very important information for us today. That they line up all night. These are like up to 100-ton blocks, 200-ton blocks, all stacked on top of each other. No problem. Those guys were supposed to not even have the pulley. They didn't have the wheel. They didn't have iron tools. Only copper. Copper does not cut rock. And on some of these blocks, there's no writing whatsoever in there. But in some of these blocks is this symbol. And these symbols are very strange because they're not cut. They're not etched. They're not carved into the stone. They are burnt into the stone, like if they were burnt by a laser. So now you have ancient walls, 5,000 years old at least, walls that have burnt geometry in them. Laser burnt geometry in them. You don't expect that from these ancient civilizations. Here's a close-up of this. Actually, now these pictures are more popular, but when I was researching this, it was extremely difficult to get those pictures. I actually had to send people over there to take the pictures. And this reason for not being able to find these pictures easily is because the archaeology community doesn't know what to do with this. So, in general, they ignored it. But if you take that geometry and you make it 3D so that each circle is a sphere, well, guess what? You get 64 tetrahedron structure when you put the fundamental geometry of the vacuum in it. So, where was that temple? That temple is called the Osirian Temple, and in Abydos, and it's behind Seti II temple, I believe. And it's actually where the fundamental myth of creation, the fundamental myth of the Egyptian mummification comes from. It's the temple of Osiris, where the wife of Osiris, Isis, supposedly revived Osiris with her magic. You have to understand that the technology I'm talking about, if you tap into the fundamental structure of creation, if you tap into the fundamental structure of space, you will start to be able to tap into the life force of creation. You can start doing things like being able to keep your biological system going because you can continuously feed back more information. You can keep recharging your system so that it doesn't run down. Because now you have access to the structure of space-time. Most people don't know, but there's pyramids in China. Those are actually Chinese pyramids. They're very large. You can see. And when you look at the Chinese pyramid, this is the pyramids in Giza. This is Titicaca, the Sun Pyramid, the Moon Pyramid, and another one there at the Way of the Dead. They all lined up nicely in the same way. And that lineup is the same lineup that you find for the belt of Orion. This is the stars of the belt of Orion. Now, these things are worlds apart. You think that's a coincidence? Never mind the fact that all of these people, all of these ancient civilizations have told us that all of their knowledge didn't come from them, that it came from sun gods, people that came from the stars. And most of them identify that the source of these sun gods as the Orion constellation. So, this is almost a direct map to what happened. Now, I already showed you the yin-yang. The I Ching is 64 hexagrams, right? And it's each hexagram has 6 sticks, and there's a broken stick, and there is a full stick. And if you cross the two, you get an X structure. Now, if you duplicate this X, right, so that you're using all the sticks in the symbols of the I Ching, then you can map it. And really, all you're doing is following the mapping that the I Ching gives you to produce the geometry of the vacuum. All you're doing is taking the number 1, number 64, and following the map that the I Ching gives you, and you get all of this geometry coming together. And that combined with the yin-yang that I showed you, the two together gives you all the map of the structure of the vacuum and the dynamics of the toroidal field. So, let's see. And then you go to the city of the sun gods, right? The forbidden city. And the city of the sun gods is guarded in front by the Sphinx in the ancient Chinese tradition is the food dog. And the food dog guards, just like the tradition of the Sphinx, the knowledge is guarded by the food dog or the Sphinx under its paw. It guards the knowledge. And what do you find under the paw? Again, the geometry of the vacuum, this intersection of the tetrahedron array. The guardian of the knowledge. Is there remains of these individuals? Is there remains of these society around the world? Is there information that says, yes, these sun gods were really here, that they were interacting with these people out there? Well, I believe there is. These are skulls that were found in South America. They're very elongated. I call them cone heads. They're not your average, skull. All around the world, from the Egyptian, the Mayans, the Incas, the ancient Indian, North American Indian, and in America, they all had this strange behavior, this strange culture where they would bend the head of the children to try to deform them. And in their tradition, it was said that they would do this to make them sun gods. They were trying to imitate something. How did they do that? Well, when the child was growing, they would tighten the band harder and harder. In some cases, they would put wood planks in the banding to push on the forehead to deform it. But when you do that to a child, the volume of the brain, the volume of the brain cavity inside the skull does not change. It's the same volume. But in some cases, in these skulls, the volume is almost twice the human brain. So, it's very interesting. Now, there wasn't just one of those skulls found. Many of these skulls were found. Most of the time, very close to very sacred sites, like in temples and so on. They had different kinds, more pointy, less pointy. Here's the normal skull of a human, and this is the elongated skull. And now, can we have sound on the computer? You see, before they were found only in, let's see, let me make sure. We have sound on the computer? Before these skulls were only found in South America or around Mexico. Now they're starting to find them all sorts of different places. I think one was found in France. And these ones were found in Siberia, in the middle of Russia. Actually, northern Russia. Unusual skulls, I would say so.
Вряд ли древние знали о нейрохирургии мозга, вряд ли, но, возможно, они пытались каким-то образом развивать отдельные нервные какие-то качества головного мозга.
Это группа людей, которые представляли собой, скажем так, живой прибор, определяющий наличие, например, опасности, или могли делать метеопрогноз.
However, it's uncertain how they got those, right? So, these skulls are found now in northern Russia. It's very unusual. France, there's other skulls that were found in Mexico that look quite different. Now, this one was found in South America. I got this from my friend Klaus Donner, which has done this exhibit of unusual objects that have been found all around the world. The first exhibit occurred in Vienna. We're trying to get it to come to the United States as well. But he showed me this skull. This is from South America. I think it's in a private collection. Note here that the bone at the top of the skull is one piece, right? It's completely one piece. Now, this cannot be a human skull because our top bones are two pieces. So that is very telling. You have a completely different physiology. This is a very unusual skull. It actually has a larger volume than the conehead skulls. This is actually the largest one ever found. You can see the hemispheres were quite separated. Let's see. Oh, it's the next slide. Just a second. Look at this one. This is called a star child. And interestingly, in this one, there was tests that were done. I've been waiting for a long time. For years, I've been looking at these ancient, skulls, wondering when are we going to get good DNA testing done. It's taken a long time because it's very difficult to get the people that own the skulls or to get the curators of the museum to allow for DNA testing and all this. So finally, DNA testing was done independently, and here is the result. You mind if I pull out the file? Let's see.
In early 2010,
We need sound on the computer.
Testing on possibly the strangest looking skull ever discovered.
Okay, let me start it over.
In early 2010, a team of geneticists in America began DNA testing on possibly the strangest looking skull ever discovered. Whilst trying to recover its nuclear DNA and matching it against the National Institute of Health database, they found a significant number of coherent base pairs that have never been seen before. This was an historic moment for science, as it proved beyond all reasonable doubt that part of the skull's DNA is not human. Since that result, the geneticists have predicted that when the final genome recovery is complete, it will provide science with the first record of alien DNA ever discovered. The skull's caretaker is Lloyd Pye. Lloyd, a researcher in aspects of human origins, named it the Star Child. It was found in Mexico in the 1930s, and through carbon dating, we know that the skull is over 900 years old. It has over 24 major physiological differences to that of a human.
These are the cuts in the skulls for DNA testing, and you see that the Star Child, when I've been saying it's half as thick, you see very clearly here. In some points it's even less than half. And this is, in the skull. So, I mean, there's just no exaggeration there. There's a complete difference in the bone throughout. Uniformly, it's different.
This is the biochemistry of a typical human bone. Its calcium and phosphorus levels are high, and its oxygen and carbon levels are low. But with the Star Child, it's quite different. The phosphorus is down and the carbon and oxygen are up, indicating its biochemistry is more like tooth enamel than regular bone.
This is a scanning electron microscope view of the bone, and this is the way bone is created. You have the cortical layer here, and in here are the cancellous holes where the bone marrow moves. And coming out of some of the cancellous holes, but also embedded in the matrix of the bone, are these fibers, these very durable, strange fibers that nobody's ever seen before. They're in no other species, and we don't really know what they are, but we just know that they're really durable because the Dremel blade that cut this through here did not cut cleanly these different fibers. That tells you they have a high resistance factor to the blade.
It lacks frontal sinuses, has smaller chewing muscles, and is missing an inion. Instead, its neck connects on top of its frame and magnum opening, indicating that its neck is about half the size of a normal human neck.
And here we see one clearly embedded in the matrix of the bone on the surface. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And you know what science says about this? You probably dropped it on a carpet and it picked up carpet fibers. I mean, really, that is the answer that I get. It has to be just fibers off a carpet or something. This can't be, it really can't be in the world of mainstream science, but there it is.
This is a piece of upper right maxilla that was found with the Star Child. When one of the teeth was extracted, it was found to have very heavy roots, indicating it was an adult when it died. When the maxilla was x-rayed, a staggering 5 more teeth were discovered, waiting to come down.
The key is that normal human bone, when you die, there are bacteria in your body that scour and eat every bit of your marrow out, and they leave your bone polished, shining, just like this, just like you see. You could eat out of that just like the bacteria did. It's so clean. There is no marrow left anywhere, and this is the way it is with all animals when they die. With a Star Child, we see a big difference, and we also see a difference in the color too. It's much more milkier than that alabaster look of the human bone, because it's got so much more collagen. But you see this red residue here sprinkled everywhere. We don't know what that is. Never seen it before, and it's not in any other species. It's not blood, because when blood oxidizes, it's not our blood anyway, or our type blood, because when blood oxidizes, it turns black. So if that was bone marrow, that would be black. So those two things, the fibers and the residue, are just unknown in anything else. And here they sit in the Star Child, both of them, and yet science just says, and this is what they say. This is what you need to understand about science, and all of these physiological differences that I've just pointed out, they mean nothing to mainstream science. They mean nothing. In January of this year, a geneticist contacted me out of the blue, and he said, I think you really might have something. And he said, if you send me a sample, I will take a new technique, a new shotgunning technique, which recovers much smaller pieces than the old primer technique. So he took it. About 6 weeks later, he got back in touch with me, and he says, you're really not going to believe what's happening here. I don't believe it. I've done it enough times now to where I'm convinced that I'm doing it right, and we're getting some very unusual results. Some of it comes out human, sure enough. You see right here, this sequence of 265 base pairs long, 265. No question about it, part of the star child is human.
So this is a really important part. This is why I'm playing this video for you.
Except, next slide, some of the star child's DNA comes back with this incredible reading. No significant similarity found. 342 base pairs long. It's a coherent base pair sequence not found in the NIH database. I said, well, what's the answer? And he says, well, it could be, and here's where we go off the deep end. It could be that it's an alien, entirely an alien, born to a human mother. And I said, what? How would that happen? How would you get a pure alien born to a human mother? So he made up a slide for me and sent it to me. And he said, now understand, this is happening today. This is happening today. If a human female has mitochondrial disease, which means that her mitochondria are bad and are going to produce very, very flawed and dead children for the most part. If it's found out that she has that and she wants to have a child with her mate, her husband, what they can do is they can take her package, put it in a dish, you've heard about this, and mix it with her husband's sperm and create a zygote with her chromosome package and her husband's chromosome package. Then they take an egg, a good egg from a third party, a woman, take that woman's chromosomal package out, put the zygote in, put that egg in the first woman, and she will have a baby that will be her and her husband's genes, but it will have the mitochondria of the third woman. So he said we could have the same thing. You'd have two aliens getting together, making a zygote, and for whatever reason, taking the chromosomal package out of a female egg, putting it in, and then she will bring it to term, and it's a full alien, nothing but alien DNA in it, but it has her mitochondrial, human mitochondrial DNA. Now, why? Why would they do that? We don't have any idea. We know this is a radical thing to say. We know that it's going to be met with a lot of resistance because it's going to prove that we don't just have a hybrid between a human and an alien 900 years ago. We have clear genetic engineering, clear evidence of genetic engineering 900 years ago. It's a much bigger pill for science to swallow, and it's also going to cause a much bigger revolution in thinking among everybody because it's going to be very hard to wrap minds around this. But this is where we are. This is what we think we can do. This is what we know we can do. We're now in the process of trying to get the money to start the process of sequencing the whole genome, because when you sequence the genome, at the end of that period, it's only about 3 to 4 months. From the time you start, 3 to 4 months, you have an answer. And you have a general idea of what that percentage is going to be, whether it's 15%, 20%, whatever. You can do it within, say, 5 points of error, just recovering the whole genome. And then you have the period of 8 to 12 months where...
You guys get the idea? You know, that's very significant. And I'm working with Klaus Donner, which has access to these other skulls that were found, to start sequencing some of the DNA of the other skulls as well. Well, in these ancient civilizations all over the place is that fundamental creation myth where the sun gods have children with the women of man. It's, I think, even in the Bible, right? I think it's in Genesis 6th chapter. And the sons of God came to the earth and found the women of man pretty, or something along those lines, and had children with them. Now, I would like to say that what's really, the reason I played that video to this end is that in this discovery that was done from this skull, you can actually see, you can actually prove that there was DNA engineering manipulation that occurred. So, you know, it's most likely not like the sun gods had intercourse with women of man, but that they might have been, you know, DNA engineering to produce, you know, those results. These are physical evidence of this ancient, very powerful myth of these sun gods being here. And this might be why so many of the ancient knowledge talks about very specific geometries, very specific temple building, very specific set of information that may be crucial for us at this time. I think one of the most remarkable evidence of these people, you see, because if this information has to do with the structure of the vacuum, if this information has to do with this technology that can tap the structure of creation, that can produce gravitational field, then you would see things like this, where huge rocks were transported. Look at the size of this thing. I think it's like 1,000 tons. This is in the quarry where it was cut. You know? Imagine trying to lift something like that. And then it's stacked, you know, on top of each other. I mean, look, this is the quarry. Over there, the Romans built a temple on top of it. They used that. It's like, wow, look at those big rocks. Hey, they started something. We'll just finish it with one of our temples, right? So, you know, they built a temple on top of it, but you see, they were moved. This is approximately a mile away. Now, a mile is not necessarily a long distance unless you're carrying a 1,000-ton block, you know? So, and so then you look at the ancient text and you look at the ancient information, you start to realize, and this is what happened to me when I was doing the research, I started to realize, wait a minute, if these sun gods were really here from advanced civilization, they left us really important information about the structure of creation. And there you see it, for instance, in this, you know, Babylonian tablets, some of the most ancient knowledge on the planet, you know, coming from the Sumerians. Look here, the singularity with the boundary of the event horizon, right? And the geometry, the evolution of the geometry structure, the division of the structure of space-time. If you look closely, you can start to recognize this. I did because I was used to looking at the 64 tetrahedron grid. When you rotate the 64 tetrahedron grid on its side, guess what? You got these exact same mapping. So they were telling us about this. They were telling us about this so we would have it on time, because these ancient people, they didn't just tell us about the information, they even gave us calendars, right? Saying, oh, by the way, here's the knowledge and here's the calendar on how long you got before you got to have this figured, right? These calendars are most known as the Mayan calendars. Here is in the Islamic tradition. This is the Kaaba at the center of Mecca. In there is supposed to be the power at the center of the faith, at the center of the power of the Quran, right? It's the creation stone. It was called the black stone or the black crystal. In the Quran, it says to have been given to man by angel Gabriel. And, you know, it's supposed to be in the center of the Kaaba. Now, archaeologists have said that that black stone is most likely meteorite that was found by a Bedouin in the desert. I assure you that you don't start the largest religion on earth because you found a black stone in the desert. This crystal, this fundamental crystal structure, we'll see a little later on, may have been this power source that was described in many different civilizations. Did you all know about this in Turkey? They found this ancient city in Turkey that is 11 to 13,000 years old. You know, 11 to 13,000 years ago, we were supposed to be hunters and gatherers. We were like basically just out of caves. And they found this city that has these huge rocks, these huge pillars that was sustaining most likely quite an elaborate roof system. And around them, they found all sorts of arrows from the hunters and the gatherers. From 13,000 years ago. But I assure you that they didn't do all this, the hunters and the gatherers. Where did it come from? So this leads us, just before the break, we'll break at 6. This leads us to the end of the ancient civilization part. I want to kind of talk quickly about this. This is the part with the Hebraic tradition, the, Old Testament tradition. When I was studying all these ancient civilizations, I kept the Bible for the end because, having been brought up in Catholic church and Catholic schools, I had kind of an allergic reaction to the whole thing. And so I was not so keen on studying the Bible. And but when I actually finally picked it up again, to start to study it, I started to study Old Testament. And I started to realize something. It's like, wait, the Old Testament talks about some object. When it says the word God, it's talking about an object. It's talking about something. They're calling the covenant of God, or the Ark of the Covenant of God, or the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And when it represents that object, it doesn't show an old man with a beard and, a pair of binoculars and a baseball bat. It doesn't. When it talks about that, it shows like a tetrahedron sitting on a throne as the representation of God. And then it describes it as like God was the crystal sea. It was called the Ark of the covenant of God. It was this incredible object that had all sorts of power. It was able to do all sorts of things. For instance, it was said that it would radiate, and if you didn't cover your face, you would get sunburned, right? And it was said that it would create a phenomenon that was called a pillar of light or a pillar of cloud above it, like a big vortex. Aha. Now I was getting interested. I liked the Bible all of a sudden. Because all through the research, as I start to elaborate how you would build this technology, I realized that crystalline structures would be very important, and I realized you would have to spin the field very, very fast to start to get the singularity to be produced. Basically, you got to reproduce those fundamental dynamics of the double torus for it to occur. For the singularity to occur, it would produce a vortex in space-time, and this is exactly what they would describe. This is what they call the tabernacle, where they would put the ark while they were going through the desert for 40 years. And when you read, the Bible, and if you read the Torah that describes this movement of the Ark of the Covenant through the desert, it talks about things like the ark would move on its own. This desert took only 6 months to travel this desert for all the Bedouins at the time. It took 40 years for the tribes of Israel to do it because they were following the ark. And it says that the ark would go on its own. And then where it would stop, they would stop. And sometimes they would stay there for years. And so they camped there for years until it would go again. And then they would follow it again. This is, some of the things that my grandfather did. My grandfather was a Bedouin. He brought people to Mecca, where another one of those crystals might have been. Actually, I think that the two were very much related, the Ark of the Covenant and the Kaaba. My grandfather was a Bedouin that brought people from Iran to Mecca because in those traditions, everybody's got to go to Mecca at least once in their lifetime. And if they can't make it, they have to send somebody with their prayer to Mecca. And they got to turn around the Kaaba 7 times with that prayer. So my grandfather was in charge of bringing all the prayers of the people that couldn't go. And then so he would guide the people that could go and bring the prayers of the ones that couldn't go. And it would take 6 months on camelback to go there and 6 months to come back. And I have an article, my father has an article from the Tehran press when my grandfather died. He was thought to be the oldest man on earth. He died at the age of 128 years old. Why did he die so old? I think it's because he went and spun around that crystal for a very long time. Because remember, and we're going to see this after the break, if you have a technology that's tapping into the source of life, the source of the organization of all things, now when you hang around that technology, there's a good chance you're going to live longer. And in the Old Testament, in Genesis, they keep insisting on the age of people. It tells you, and so was 735 years old and had 325 children. Dude, I have 2 and I'm like overwhelmed. Holy schmoly. You know? And, you know, and so lived 800 years, and so. And you know, the ancient Egyptian talked about the moment of initiation when the initiate would go and in front of this power, and they would come out of the temple as semi-god and live forever. And so on. So, you know, this all started to sound similar. And then when you looked at the word God in the Bible, if you actually look at where that word is translated from, it's translated from the Greek, the tetragrammaton. This is actually at the forefront of your Bible in the preface. If you look carefully, it says the word God is taken from the word tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton, folks. Every time you see the word God in the Bible, you can say tetragrammaton. So when you go, oh my tetragrammaton, now you say, and for a guy like me that's doing my research, when I see the word tetra, you know, I clue in, right? So tetra is 4 in Greek. And grammaton has been translated as grammar. So the 4 letters of God. Here's the 4 letters of God, the tetragrammaton. And they're, in the Kabbalistic tradition, they're typically arranged like this in a triangle shape. And it, you know, that is a good representation of the isotropic vector metric, which is, you know, one face of it is 4, 3, 2, 1. 4, 3, 2, 1. And, you know, this grammaton part of the word has 2 roots. 4 letters of God, so it has the root grammar for letter, but as well, it has another root, which is the source for the word gravity. It represents grams or weight. So all of a sudden, you have a tetrahedron, a tetra, that has gravity for the Word of God in the Bible. Okay? Most of you have read the Bible, right? It's, no? No. Okay. Never mind. So, it's very remarkable, though. It starts to give you another understanding of why there might have been a distortion of our understanding of creation. The ancient might have been talking about geometry and technology, physical thing, and then it's got all mixed up into, you know, dogma. And when each letter has a number, and when you add the numbers together, you get 72, which is found in the Bible everywhere, the 72 faces of God, or the 72 names of God. But you see, this is only the male tetrahedron again. It's only the male approach to God again. If we have another one of these that come together, now we double this number. 72 plus 72 is what? 144. 144 is found in the Bible in Revelation, where it says, and the crystal city of the ark will come back to the earth, right? And it has faces of 144 crystals or something along those lines. Well, oh, the part I forgot to tell you is that if you take 64 tetrahedrons and you count the amount of faces on the outside, you get 144 faces. And then they tell you, if you decode this geometry, which is called the tree of knowledge, the Kabbalistic tree, which relates to the tree of knowledge that's found in the Garden of Eden. Notice that many of these ancient civilizations talks about the time of revelation, the time where we're going to understand all of the mysteries that we hadn't understood before and that we are going to ascend. When they tell us we're going to ascend, maybe they didn't just mean spiritually, but actually they meant literally we're going to ascend. Right? When they tell us this, they say to us that this moment, this transformation is going to come from this understanding of the fundamental geometry of knowledge, the tree of knowledge. That if we can decode this, we will understand the principles of the universe, the mystery of all mysteries. But then they give you a warning. They say, many have tried, and most have gone crazy. When I came across that, I thought, well, you know, most people think I'm crazy already. So it's not going to make much of a difference. So I thought, wait, you know, I got to figure this out. And I drew the whole thing, and I was in my van still, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van above my bed so I could wake up and look at it and try to figure it out. And so I looked at it. Oh, by the way, as well, this is related, the tree of knowledge is related to the tree that's described in Genesis as the tree with the apple thing, you know, the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, which the ancient civilization tells us that when we're going to ascend, the earth will regain its state of garden. Well, that would mean that we literally ascend, not just spiritually. Because if the earth goes back to a state of garden, that's because we took all the cement off. Because we're not on it anymore. Right? So, you know, I was thinking about this. And, you know, this tree of knowledge as well in the ancient, in the book of Genesis is an apple tree, right? And the apple is like the knowledge. And so all of a sudden I realized, wait, and I grabbed an apple and I cut it in half. And if you look at half an apple, you realize you've got a double torus. Okay? With the seed in the middle, and each seed contains the potential of infinite amount of apples, because each seed can make the tree that makes apples, that make trees, that makes apples, and so on. So, you know, this amazing thing was coming together. I was really liking the Bible all of a sudden. And so I start to look at this, and I realize that obviously you have a tetrahedron on the bottom, and that on the top, you have an octahedron, which is the two geometry you need to build a 64 tetrahedron grid. But I couldn't figure out this part here. So I eventually realized that if I took the top part and I slid the bottom part into the top part, all of a sudden it became a three-dimensional object. And all the vectors were there to produce the 8-star tetrahedron. So all the information was there. And then it was said in the Kabbalistic tradition that there is not only one tree, but that there's 4 trees of knowledge that are connected at the root. And that they have a mirror function. So there's not 4, they can be 8 if they're mirrored, if they're polarized. So if 8 of these trees come together and they decode to 8-star tetrahedron, then you get the 64 tetrahedron grid right out of it. And how do you know you've done it right? Because by the time you finish, you can plaster the Kabbalistic tree right back on it. You've got a full loop. And you can actually array it right around. So I don't know if I've gone crazy, but it seems to be correct. There's much more details to this structure. You can actually flip the trees around and get all the other tetrahedrons. And if you follow the actual Kabbalistic tradition, the roots become the crown, and the crown becomes the root. And the whole object of the decoding of the tree is to find this singularity, this point of infinite density that's at the heart of the Kabbalistic tradition, is the heart of God, the point of infinite potential. I mean, this is like literally describing everything I was describing to you in physics earlier on. And so a lot of this information is uncovering now. It's coming out. We are literally at that moment in history where we are recovering the information, and we have the knowledge base in science now to apply it, and to apply it to our external world so that we can transform our world, transform our technology, and ascend. Are we gonna make that step? You and me together, we will make that change. It's coming. It's a storm that's brewing that cannot be stopped. And we have a limited amount of time. There is changes that are occurring in our world that are going to have consequences on our capacity to move forward. We have to make that transition. We're very, very close. We need every one of you. Every one of you to become aware of the information, to take the time every day to connect with your vacuum self, to connect with your infinite potential, because in that point of infinite potential is your true essence, is your mastery. Every one of you is a master. You hold that within yourself, all knowledge. And I actually mathematically proved it to you today. Yeah. So we're going to take a little break, and after the break, we're going to do another hour to an hour and a half where I'm going to talk about what was done in laboratory, which I usually don't talk about in public. And after this, we'll have question and answers. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Most likely, very advanced beings tried to communicate this to us in ancient time all the way to modern time through crop circles and other things, and that there's evidence of these beings being around for a very long time. So maybe they're waiting for us to kind of reach this level of knowledge, to reach this level of awareness so that we can, enter or re-enter a larger community of the galaxy, maybe a larger community of our local universe even. There's evidence that this larger community has been around, not just in ancient time, in modern time as well. I mean, we're talking thousands, millions of videos, people like astronauts that have come forward talking about seeing those things, and airplane pilots, high-level military personnel, even high-level military personnel talking about these people, about all sorts of things that happen in nuclear facilities during the Cold War. Maybe the Cold War was cold, not because we're so wise and we didn't shoot at each other, but actually a lot of them have come forward, very, very entrusted people in our society saying, actually, we pushed a button a bunch of times and UFOs would show up and turn everything off. Right? Like the Russians talked about it, the Americans are talking about it now. Many countries are releasing their UFO files. England, France, Belgium, Mexico, Brazil. The list is getting longer and longer. Spain. And, at this point, even the Vatican, okay? When you think of the Vatican, you don't think of an organization that's very forward, Like in 1992, the Vatican excused Galileo. They're not, you know, so progressive. Yet, the Vatican, a few years ago, like 2 years ago now, started to release statements from the head of astronomy at the Vatican. And you know, the head of astronomy at the Vatican is very respected astronomer because the Vatican actually owns a lot of the largest telescopes on Earth. In fact, most of the telescopes that are observing the sun are owned by the Vatican. So, you gotta wonder why, right? Maybe the sun gods were called the sun gods because they used the sun to travel through the universe, to come here. You see, if everything is a singularity, and if you have a singularity at the center of your ship, then if you want to go from one singularity to another, you can use your local singularity, jump into your local singularity to travel the universe. In this case, you would go either to the center of the Earth, which would connect with the center of the sun, which connects you with the center of the galaxy, which would connect you with the center of the sun where you're going, and out you come. So you would be coming right out of the sun. And that would give you the name sun gods. Interestingly, when you look in this ancient civilization, they talk about the sun as the doorway. And so this information from all of this together, and you know, if you're going through the sun, and by the way, there is video from NASA. I think recently I was interviewed on Coast to Coast, for instance, a few months ago, because do you know Coast to Coast? This is a radio show, fairly famous radio show. And because there was all these videos came out of, you know, NASA showing these big ships, these big balls beside the sun. They were not small. These balls were the size of Jupiter, okay? Which is the largest planet in our solar system, okay? But you got to understand, if you have control over gravity, size is no longer an issue. You can make ships the size of planets, no problem. In fact, the singularity you would build to power a ship approximately the size of the Earth would be barely the size of a baseball, right? That's all you would need. So, you know, I wanted to build one of those. Let's make one, you know. And I started to study, you know, like the dynamics of how I would have to build that. Obviously, I looked at natural systems, and you can see that the, let's see, where's my laser? You can see they reproduce this dynamic of the double torus. Can I have the volume of my mic up a little bit? Thank you. I'm losing my voice. And so you can see, you know, those dynamics are seen in galaxies. I was saying as well that matter is produced at the center of galaxies. You know, this is actually what we see. We see these huge jets of matter particles being ejected from the center of galaxies. And the matter would be produced in the center of the galaxy because the massive black hole in the center, which my theory predicted 20 years ago, that we were going to find black holes at the center of all galaxies. And I was laughed at in physics conference. Well, now they found black holes at the center of all galaxies. And in that black hole, it's pushing, it's shearing, right? It's shearing the structure of space-time into smaller vortices we call atoms. And that's how atoms are produced, and then they come out. They're ejected at the poles. And depending on the angle on which they are ejected, depending on their magnetic moment on which they are ejected, they have different properties which produce the table of elements of our universe, all the elements. So you'd have certain elements more in the middle of the vortex and other elements more on the edge of the vortex. Well, there was this amazing illuminated genius in 1927 that figured this out. His name was Walter Russell. He's actually credited for discovering many of the elements in our table of elements. How did he do it? He went into a dark room for 32 days, told his wife, "Don't disturb me." I don't get away with that, you know. She's like, "Yeah, right. Remember you got 2 kids?" Yeah. Anyway, went in there, and in this room, he plotted a spiral. And in the spiral, he built the octaves of each of the elements, right? And as he built the octaves of each of the elements, using musical notes, he realized that some of the notes were missing. Are you filming? You can't be filming. And when he actually got all of the notes worked out, he realized some of the note was missing. And so he said, "We're missing some of the elements." And that's how he discovered plutonium and thorium and deuterium and tritium. And he started to discover all these elements that had not been isolated. Actually, some of these elements were not found until 10 years later. But he could figure it out by plotting it on a spiral. Why? Because you're looking down the vortex. And if you got the octaves right, you're going to get the elements. Well, many people are aware of Walter Russell's work. And if you're interested, you should read one of his books, I think, is a very good one. Is called Atomic Suicide by Walter Russell. It's called Atomic Suicide because many of the elements he found are radioactive elements that afterwards were used to start doing nuclear power plant. And he felt very bad about that. And he wanted to warn the world not to use them to make power. And, and in this book, he describes many of the dynamics of the universe, he comes to conclude that the universe is a fundamental grid, right? Another one. And he doesn't say anything about the tetrahedron. In the beginning of the book is a preface written by his wife, Leo Russell. And in the preface, she talks about Walter Russell's relationship to Nikola Tesla. And you all know about Nikola Tesla? He's actually the main inventor of our modern society. He's invented most of the things we use. And Tesla was having a really hard time with society, so he told Russell, you know what? You should bury all of your work into, a vault and get it shut down with orders to open it in 1,000 years. Because humanity is not ready. Well, his wife convinced him to write this book and put a lot of the information in there. But I think what he did is that he didn't say everything. He just encoded it in there. So he doesn't mention tetrahedrons, but in his modeling of the fundamental structure of space, right, the fundamental structure of the vacuum, he actually draws a little tetrahedron in the corner to let you know, maybe, put the tetrahedron in there, right? So here is his grid. And he describes it as the polarization, action, reaction, counter up of 9 nevermore. So he describes each section as this, singularity where the tetrahedron intersect. But he doesn't say tetrahedron. Now, if you take his grid and you rotate the 64 tetrahedron so it's a cube, sure enough, you got exactly his grid. So the fact that he put that little thing in the corner was very important. So Russell, interestingly, I was thinking, okay, so we've got this double torus, we got this geometry of the vacuum. How are we going to do this in a technology? Well, if I took this geometry and I mapped it over structure, I could build a rib structure. I could build a coil, an electromagnetic coil that reproduce that fundamental dynamic of the vacuum, that reproduce that fundamental dynamic of the double torus. And I built it. So this is actually a physical model. You can see it's made out of 12 ribs. Remember the number 12? And each of these ribs is attached to a set of electronics that sends a pulse to it so that I can pulse them in sequence to produce rotation, to produce extremely fast rotation if I have to. And I can pulse the bottom ribs in one direction and the top ribs in the other. And in the middle is a container that is a crystal container that has gases in it. The gas are ionized so that they're magnetic. And as I pulse the ribs now, the gas will follow. So I can reproduce a little galaxy inside the crystals. What's in the middle of a galaxy? So as I made that calculation, I said, oh, I have to spin this very fast to create that singularity. You can imagine that I have to spin things into the millions of RPM to get that type of coherency. It became clear to me very early that you couldn't spin a magnetic field, a physical object like a magnet, that fast. But just to give you an idea how close we are, the European agency a few years ago took a superconductive magnet, right, a ceramic magnet, and spun it 5,000 RPM, and they noticed that objects around it start to lose weight. Very little amount of weight, but they were only spinning 5,000 RPM. You need millions of RPM, you know. But they can't spin a superconductor that fast. But I can, because I'm spinning plasma, which is what the universe does. It spins plasma. So this is actually the coils being coiled. This technology is being patented now. It's a U.S., you know, it's patent pending in the U.S. and it's been filed internationally. This is, well, I'm sorry. This is in my earlier lab. This is in 1999. Most people don't know I do hardware. This is the coil being coiled. You see, we coiled inside the coil so that I can put current to the coils so that I get a magnetic field, and then I pulse the rib to rotate the field. And when I did that, I'm going to tell you the result in a little while, but here the field is active. There is no current going to the device, because when you start spinning the field, because you're spinning the structure of the vacuum, it has, you know, it's a superconductor, it's a superfluid. When you start spinning it, it just spins. It spins for a very long time. You can see that picture is actually pretty blurry because it's hard to take a picture because the photons get spun. Now, when I was doing this, I wasn't sure, you know, what I was doing, because my first experiment, I had very little funding. It was a small lab. We didn't have much staff. I had little funding. So, you know, I did an experimental test on a device that I didn't think was going to do anything. And I, you know, built little amplifiers to pulse the ribs that couldn't go very fast. The maximum speed I could get was about 6,000 RPM. But when I did it, it produced effects anyway, and I'll talk to you about the effects in a minute. But while I was doing these experiments, a few months before, the Institute, or the University of Science and Philosophy, which was the legacy of Walter Russell. Walter Russell had started that institute, and they had contacted me to be part of the Science Advisory Board of that institute. And when I did this, I got involved with them, and I guess somebody pulled a file from the vault and gave it to me. And they didn't know I was doing experiments. Nobody's filming, right? And so, I didn't know, they didn't know I was doing experiments, but all of a sudden I received this file that was from Walter Russell in 1927. It was a file of blueprints of a device he built that nobody knows he built. To this day, I think I'm the only one that has ever had contact with this file since 1927 when it was built. And it showed a device that was very similar to what I had just built. Built by Walter Russell. Look at how close it is. And you can see the blueprint give good details on angles, very similar angles and so on. And the file came with a report from Westinghouse Laboratories from 1927, where the device was tested. And what they would do is they would put a little water in the container in the middle of the device with trace minerals. And when they would put power to the device, things would happen in which, in each case, the resulting gas was different. Meaning they were getting transmutation of elements. This is from an official report from Westinghouse, which was at the time military labs. And look at it. They actually called the device the transmutator. Transmutation of elements. In 1927, folks. So what happened is that when I turned this thing on the first time, I didn't have the crystal that goes in the middle. I only had the coil, and I wanted to test the coil. So I plugged all the amplifiers, and I put power to the coils, and then started to pulse the ribs. And I got really cool effects, like you could take a little magnet in your hand and be 8 feet away from the device, and the magnet would pulse like a heartbeat. And all sorts of cool stuff. But, you know, nothing extraordinary. And then I lost funding while the crystal was being manufactured. Because you wouldn't believe how hard it is on this planet to fund a space drive. It's like you've been dropped off on this far planet in the corner of the galaxy here with no means, right? And you gotta like find your way back home with the local, you know, available material, right? And so, you know, I lost funding, but luckily the crystal factory had just finished the crystal, and they sent me the crystal. So now I'm receiving the crystal just before I have to move from my lab, and I don't know where to put it. So I stuck it in the coils, in the middle, in the chamber that's there for the crystal. And I didn't put power back to the coil. I only powered the coil for 45 minutes, you know, like months before I received the crystal. And so I put the crystal in the coils, and I went to sleep that night. Can you guys turn those cameras off in the back, please? Thank you. And so I went to sleep that night, and I woke up in the middle of the night because there was this humming sound in my lab. It was going. When you realize that you have infinite potential within yourself, when you take the time every day, even if it's for 15 minutes, 10 minutes, to start your day by going within towards singularity, towards stillness, towards that point of infinite density that centers your existence. When you take that time, you're connecting with your essence, which is connected to the essence of all other things in the universe. You have that potential. You have that power. Use it. Become the linkage of all of the morphogenic field of the planet. Become one of the lights in the morphogenic field that is bringing more light and more light to the whole thing. Become one of the butterfly that's flapping its wing to produce the hurricane of change over our planet. Take that time, because it's crucial at this time for you individually and for the planet as a whole. So thank you for participating today, and I hope we can be together again very soon. Until then, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May the vacuum be with you.